Tim Burton is widely known for his unique drawings and the worlds he creates. In terms of his visual style, much of his body of work is clearly influenced by different types of cinema and art, such as German Expressionism, Gothic horror, and American kitsch. But one important element that became the foundation of all of his work was his ability to transform and reimagine mature stories and twisted tales into endearing stories, such as Corpse Bride being inspired by a folklore tale, or Vincent, which takes its influence from the life of Vincent Price and his horror films. And the story of Frankenweenie, both the 1982 short film and the 2012 reboot, are a prime example of this, where Frankenweenie takes the mythical quality of the classic tale of Frankenstein and uses it to change the emotional context of the story from a man and a creature to a boy and his best friend. Although Frankenweenie does take influence from the original 1931 feature film by James Whale and the 1818 novel by Mary Shelley, Burton didn't go out to make a replica or copy of Frankenstein's story. He wanted to add not only an aesthetic quality such as the black and white image or lighting or Dutch angles, but also a thematic one that would elevate the story of a young Victor Frankenstein and his dog Sparky. Many of Burton's films center around misunderstood monsters or individuals who are outcasts of a society that continues to conform to standards even they don't understand nor agree with. In the 2006 revised edition of the book Burton on Burton, he describes his fascination with misunderstood monsters and how it influenced the way he created his characters. King Kong, Frankenstein, Godzilla, the creature from the Black Lagoon, they're pretty much the same. They just have different rubber suits and makeup. But there was something about that identification. Every kid responds to some image, some fairy tale image. And I felt most monsters were basically misperceived. They usually had more heartful souls than the human characters around them. Both Frankenstein stories function well as the other, as they explore someone who witnessed death and their journey in escaping mortality. However, this can also serve as a contrast between the original film and novel and Burton's version. As Shelley's Frankenstein is driven to conquer mortality through the fear of death and curiosity, young Frankenstein does it out of grief and love, and I think it's this difference that plays a grand part of Burton's collection of stories. No matter how gothic or dark many of his tales or characters offer, audiences can connect with them on an emotional level as they tackle common issues that people endure, such as loneliness, grief, guilt, and frustration. But in the case of Frankenweenie, this was a film that explored a child's perspective on those issues and feelings. And this is further carried out on a technical level with its use of low angles to adopt Victor's perspective. It allowed the film to heighten the level of reality and risk. This is seen when Victor brings Sparky back to life. The entire sequence is clearly modeled after Whale's film. But at the same time, the film balances its heightened reality with the normal life of Victor and the adult characters around him. The relationship between Victor and Sparky was inspired by Burton's first relationship with his pet, and what he wanted was to replicate the memory and the spirit of him. For many children, the death of their first pet is often their first experience of death, and many of them learn to cherish the memories of their closest friend. And from my personal experience, it's a heartbreaking reality that everyone has to go through, whether now or later. This is reflected symbolically throughout the film as Victor brings his pet Sparky back to life, who remains the same pet with the same spirit and energy despite some minor physical changes. As if Victor's love and memory strengthen the condition of his dog Sparky, while the other characters acting in similar fashion to Shelley's Frankenstein bring their pets back to life out of curiosity, greed, and envy, resulting in the distortion of the pets and their evolution into monsters. Frankenweenie's visual style is a continuation of Burton's early work and ability to unite different visual aesthetics, especially with the case of the American suburban lifestyle with Gothic imagery. Burton would juxtapose dark and twisted images against the backdrop of conventional buildings and symmetrical structures. as a way to highlight the absurdity of a mundane society and subdue their interpretation of what is considered dark or dangerous. Within the film, the town of New Holland was designed with a 50s suburban aesthetic, a common landscape present in his other films, such as Victor, Edward Scissorhands, and A Nightmare Before Christmas. This aesthetic and suburban lifestyle was also influenced by Burton's childhood hometown of Burbank, California, where much of its designs offer a structured and conservative layout of the world. This is, of course, accompanied by the sentiments of conformity and restrictions. In contrast, his style of drawing and art was influenced by German Expressionism, a movement during the World War I period where many German films were a reaction to the horrors of war through its abstract visuals. Films such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu provided a strong foundation for Burton to explore different possibilities in shapes, structures, and patterns, and this is noticeable in Frankenweenie for its shadows and set design. But Burton does not focus on creating repulsive or disturbing imagery. Rather, he focuses on making his characters and set designs more endearing and charming. A good example of this is the Pet Cemetery in Frankenweenie, where much of its designs stem from a Gothic aesthetic. This would be juxtaposed with small statues of animals and pets that would subdue audiences' expectations of a typical cemetery. His use of these visual styles and aesthetic helped communicate his feelings towards conformity while also enhancing the story he wants to tell. Frankenweenie does fit the mold of the horror classics with its use of black and white and being able to capture particular angles and set pieces. The film isn't a parody or a satire, it has its own story with its own characters, lessons, and journey. The importance was not to make a direct link nor reference to the classic Frankenstein story, than it is to transform the context of the story. By using the framework of Frankenstein Story, Burton was able to elevate the emotional impact of Frankenweenie, from a man creating a monster to a boy bringing his best friend back to life.